Welcome to the second session in Understanding God's Heart for Children. Last session we thought about hidden children, that how in the Old Testament children are playing unique and key roles in the flow of the story, yet often we overlook them. This session we're thinking about Jesus, the kingdom of God, and children. We have to see all this in the context of what Jesus came to do. He came to seek the lost, came to draw those who were once outsiders to become insiders, to become part of the kingdom of God. In Luke 4, Jesus inaugurates his ministry by quoting Isaiah 61. You can look at those words in that passage yourself. But what he's doing there is saying that those who were once far off, those who were considered not to be important, are drawn close and become key. Children in the era or the age of the New Testament, in New Testament times, were generally not well treated or respected. Harsh discipline, abandonment, infanticide were acceptable if they were the will of the father. Under Roman law, fathers had almost complete power over their children, over their son. Whether that meant scourging him or keeping him in chains, or working in the fields, putting him to death, all were acceptable. And into that context comes the words and the person of Jesus. Into this context comes Jesus, not as a powerful ruler arriving on legions of horses, but as a vulnerable child. We often forget that when thinking about Jesus, the kingdom and children, that Jesus himself was a child. The incarnation of Christ is our first challenge. Jesus himself was a child. God chose the normal processes that we all go through. And there was incredible risk. Infant mortality rates were high. The fact that Herod was on a mission to kill all newborn children, the possibility of death was always imminent. The fullness of God in an infant is in many ways almost unfathomable for us, isn't it? We often overlook it. In fact, the early church father Nestorius found it repugnant. He said, "I deny that God is 2 or 3 months old." So Jesus himself was a child. And when we think about Jesus and the kingdom, he does something very unique in his dealings with children. In fact, Jesus uses a child to settle a very competitive argument that the disciples were having about who was the greatest in the kingdom of God. In Mark 9:33, the parallels in Matthew 18 and in Luke 9. At Capernaum, Jesus asked the disciples what they had been discussing along the road. And Jesus knew full well what they'd been discussing. They'd been saying, well, when Christ sets up his kingdom, what type of positions are we going to have? Are we going to sit at the number 2 spot or the number 3 spot? What kind of power would they have? Apart from revealing just how badly they had missed what the kingdom of God was, they do something else. Because Jesus brings a child into their midst, which surprised them. Because children were at the bottom of the social order. They were alongside the foreigners and the widows. And they honestly didn't have anything in their minds to learn from a child. So Jesus does this. He says, if you want to have any part of my kingdom, if you want to be part of the kingdom of God, you have to become like a child. And in doing so, he reveals something about the nature of the kingdom of God. Anyone who enters has to become like a child. And anyone who welcomes a child, Jesus said, is welcoming me. The kingdom isn't about or isn't like you think it is. See, the kingdom is embodied in a sense in the reaction of a child. Just able to take and accept with faith. Being able to believe. Being able to take things at their word. Children are not only eligible to receive the kingdom, but they're models for what it means to receive the kingdom. Perhaps you in your small group, or however you're watching this, can think about that in your groups. Why don't you just press pause and think about that for a few minutes? I wonder how you see children in your own context, in your family, for example, or perhaps those you work with at school or in a youth group or whatever your context might be. Do you see some of those qualities of children being able to receive the kingdom because of their faithfulness, because of their open-heartedness? There's a great quote that I want to leave you with that comes from the founder of the Viva Network. It says, "Children create sanity in a mad world. They draw us back from our self-destructive habits of overwork, abuse, neglect and callousness, and instead bring us tenderness, joy and play."
We don't always get along. If we are trying now, don't seem to try too long. Watching your